there isn't really a right way to sort of go about getting into the criminal law. Just as a bit of background for me, I didn't do it the very orthodox way. What happened was I came back from an exchange, which everyone should do at university, and I didn't really have a clue as to what to do for the semester off that I had. So I sent out an email to the DPP basically pleading for some work experience with absolutely no qualifications whatsoever. But fortunately, they intercepted that email, and it was a kind of jovial email, as is apparently my way. And they decided that they would give me a shot. So I did 2 weeks work experience. I rocked up on my first day. My supervisor was at Comic-Con, and my other supervisor was in trial. So my first day was spent with a drug trafficking file in the confines of my office. I didn't have lunch because I was so nervous. And in the end, I got to about 5:15 and I walked around to the managing solicitors and I said, sorry, when can I go home? And they said, look, you can go home, that's fine. Where is everyone? And I said, I don't actually know. I've just been working on this file. After that, I finished my 2 weeks work experience and they said, thank you very much, on you go. And then I got a call a couple of days later and they said, do you like being bored? And I said, yes. They said, would you like to be our receptionist? I said, sure. So I was the DPP receptionist for 6 months, until which time they said, look, you've served your penance, do you want to be a clerk? And sort of for the last 18 months or 2 years, I've been a clerk at the DPP. I've recently actually just been seconded onto a couple of major Supreme Court trials, one which actually got its verdict handed down today, if any of you have read the papers, in the case of the actually not so criminally negligent midwife. So that was 9 weeks of my life. But I think in terms of telling people exactly how to get into the criminal law or what you're going to expect from the criminal law, it's really what you make of it. I mean, I certainly, it's not lost on me that the kid that did 2 weeks work experience back in the middle of 2017 is now sitting there. Today we were meant to start a murder trial that I'm assisting on, and today we also got a verdict in a manslaughter trial. So depending on what you want to do with it, you can pretty much make it whatever you desire. I mean, I'm certainly not one to suggest that, there are right and wrong ways to go about things. You send off your clerkship applications, you send in your district court associate applications, but I think if you really do want to succeed in the criminal law, you're going to find a way. I was actually going to start this presentation. I think Kelly sent me the answers to the criminal law exam, but I won't tell anyone them. But I think in terms of, and we're obviously all here to talk about our experiences, if you're looking for a right way or a wrong way to go about getting in, there isn't really one. And as David said, look, there are confronting episodes. The manslaughter trial that I did was all about home birth and childbirth. I've seen many placentas, I've seen many visions of birth, and I've heard, expert evidence on the topic and all of that sort of stuff. But whilst university doesn't prepare you for that, I think it also gives you a large appreciation of exactly what it is that you do. And obviously the criminal law subject has changed quite a bit since I did it. It's more procedural focused as well as practical now. So you get that understanding of the fact that you are dealing with not just victims, but witnesses and vulnerable people when they're all around there. So, I've spoken to mothers whose babies have tragically died. I've spoken to major crime investigators who appear on the TV every second night. And it's not something that you would expect to be doing in a role as a clerk, but I think if you can realise that you will get those opportunities down the track if you try and work hard enough. And I'm not suggesting that it's easy. I've certainly been in the office until 1 a.m, 2 a.m, whatever, scrolling through 30,000 e-crime files. But I think if there's anything that you take, especially from the experiences, I mean, Ailey's obviously done a lot as well, and I know her quite well, but you've got guys that have gone to London with this sort of stuff. So just try and take every opportunity that you can, and most of all, just try and enjoy it, because whilst it is, nervous and my heart was beating a million miles an hour in the verdict today, it's goddamn exciting half the time, standing there in court and realising that you are actually at the forefront, and then you see your case in the paper and you go, ooh, that's actually kind of cool. So apart from that, I'm sure we'll get lots of questions at the end, but...
My name's Mason. I work for South Australia Police. I can probably I'm a second year law student and I'm doing criminal law at the moment, so I'm looking out and seeing people that I study with, and this is kind of really intimidating. But I've worked for SAPOL for 7 years. I started pretty much at the bottom of the food chain. I started data entering national police check applications, which is monotonous, boring, and as exciting as you would expect. I suppose, I've only been doing law for the last 2 years, so it's not as if I've gone out, grabbed a placement and been involved in the criminal law in a practical side of things. Primarily, my role right now is in statutory compliance section is dealing with all the information that's collated as a result of a criminal investigation and using it for secondary purposes. So a lot of what we deal with is domestic violence, child protection information, as well as making sure that the state doesn't get sued as a result of matters that have perhaps not gone our way. I think my main focus for this evening would probably be to get out there that criminal law isn't necessarily just being a litigator, and it's not just being a barrister, it's not just being a solicitor. There are so many different areas. A lot of what I do with at SAPOL is advising on criminal policy. So recently, Victoria is talking about introducing a spent convictions piece of legislation into the Parliament. So I'm being asked to comment on that. Last year, the Commonwealth Parliament passed the Assistance and Access Act, which basically allows certain justice agencies to tell Apple, Facebook, Twitter, hey, we suspect someone's doing something naughty, we know you encrypt your information, we want it. So I've been asked to provide comment on that as well. So it's not necessarily this narrow, well, not really narrow, but it's not just going to court, providing advice to a client or anything like that. There are broader applications, particularly throughout the public sector. I deal with child protection officers a lot, Crown solicitors, our own general counsel. So it's, just going off of what Sean said, it is really, the criminal law is really what you make it. If you want to be a litigator, then sure, I suppose you can find the right pathway for that. You don't have to be a litigator. You can get involved in policy. You can get involved in politics if you want to and use your degree that way. Before I did criminal law, I didn't actually really have any aspirations of getting involved as a litigator or whether it was prosecution or defence. That's actually kind of changed slightly. But I'm still more focused on the policy aspect of criminal law, whether that's how police collect evidence, what they do with the evidence, and what can be done with that evidence once the criminal matter's over. What other use is that evidence? Which in family court matters it's quite relevant, particularly to do with domestic violence and child protection.
All right, my name's Ben. I'm a fourth year student, and I'm, like Mason, I'm also doing criminal law at the moment. But I'm also doing an internship in the chambers of Justice Lovell at the Supreme Court. The bad news, I suppose, about that is that's a university offered one, so any of you who are in final year at the moment won't be eligible for that. It's the Law and Justice internship, which is available if you get particularly good results in the public law subjects, so constitutional law and administrative law. Not all of the placements are with judges, but there are several in the Supreme Court. I would definitely recommend, though, in some way or another, trying to get any kind of position with a judge, whether it be at the District Court or the Supreme Court. There are internships. There are also judges' associate positions, which I would highly recommend you apply for. They're a year long, or I think 2 years at the District Court, where you are basically a judge's PA, and you organise their timetable and spend all of your time in the judge's chambers with the judge. And this provides you with very, very valuable insights. During trials, when there's an adjournment, you go out with the judge into his anteroom, and he can express his thoughts on what's going on. You get to read all of the submissions, see basically all of the barristers in South Australia presenting their case. And it's also quite entertaining because you get to see all of the submissions and read all the sordid details of the various things that go on. I would agree with the others that it can be confronting. Any position in criminal law can be confronting. I think the first day that I started, there was a murder trial that we were in for the next 2 weeks, and on the first day the judge said to the associates, I'll show them the photos. And they warned me, they're a bit confronting, and the judge said, I've seen worse on TV. And it was a man who had been effectively disemboweled by a kitchen knife. So you do have to brace yourself a little bit for the sort of things you'll be hearing. Thankfully, I haven't had any sexual offences or anything like that to deal with, which I think would probably be the worst. But yeah, it's definitely a unique skill set. And I would, again, encourage you, even if it's just sending an email to a judge's chambers and asking if they're willing to have you come and do some work experience or observe a trial that they're in or something like that, the associates will at the very least get back to you and say no, and there's no harm done. So I would recommend you take any steps you can to, in some way or another, get into contact with a judge.
My experiences all come from the wonderful tool of sending emails. From second year, I started sending out random emails to try and find experience wherever I could. So coincidentally, I started with justice level, actually doing 2 weeks in the Supreme Court, which was a murder trial. From there, sending more emails, I went to the DPP for a couple of weeks. After that, to Caldecott criminal lawyers, who take nearly any student who will email them. So note that one down if you're very keen to get some defence experience. And from there, I bothered David to acquire some experience in London, where I was very fortunate to spend a couple of weeks with Jonathan Polnay, who's a highly esteemed barrister over there. At the moment, this has all taken me to working at Lytton Carris in sort of a more corporate environment, looking particularly at corporate crime, corporate fraud, for example. But I think the main thing I would have to contribute after these guys is just send out emails, and someone will eventually get back to you and offer you something, because everyone in criminal law is very collaborative, and they enjoy helping students.
First of all, I just want to say thank you for coming. It's great to see such a number of people attending this seminar. When I started law school in 2014, I didn't know anyone who was interested in criminal law apart from myself and Sean, I think, and that was it. So it's really great to see you all here today. Before I delve into my experience in criminal law, I think I just want to touch on one thing, which is get out into the courts, see it firsthand, because that's what got me interested in criminal law when I was a first year. So going a little bit into my experience, I again have already touched on this in the lecture, but when I was in second year, I had the same scenario to Ellie. I cold emailed a bunch of barristers, and luckily I was picked up by one at Lenking Chambers. Just for the reference, they're all criminal law barristers in those chambers, so if you would like, just cold email them if you're looking for some work experience or perhaps even a role as a clerk. During that time, I can't even remember how old I was. I think I was 19, and within my first week, I looked at child pornography, and that was pretty confronting, but it gave me a good taste of what a career in criminal law could look like. I spent the next period of that time just going to court, observing proceedings, listening to things that I didn't quite understand, such as mental impairment, which I found very confusing at this time, and I still do to this day. I think most people in the profession can attest to that as well. So from there, I did a lot of voluntary work with a social justice mandate. So I volunteered for Aboriginal legal rights movement in their criminal practice division. So you're working with Indigenous clients, so some of the most vulnerable clients that you're ever going to come into contact with. And I think on that point, just following on from what David said, that's what I find most rewarding about a career in criminal law, is that you are working with people who are at their lowest low and have likely been at that lowest low point for the majority of their life. So getting some help in some way is very rewarding, not only for them, but for yourself as well. And it's by no means an ego-driven thing, it's just helping the greater good, I guess. And from a prosecution perspective as well, I thought that I would be the bad guy, but in some situations, you're not always the bad guy. Just a case example, so when I did my work experience at the DPP in 2017, I went along to the Magistrates Court to see a lady who was being sentenced for stabbing her husband. Just some brief context, she had been in a domestic violence relationship for in excess of 20 years at the hand of this man. I won't go into the details of it, but it was pretty disgusting, and he had been in and out of prison for a number of years. One night she snapped and stabbed him multiple times. At the end of that, she realised what she had done. She called SAPOL immediately and an ambulance, and they attended at the scene. She entered a guilty plea very early on and was very, very remorseful about the whole thing. Anyway, to get to my point, when the judge had sentenced her, by the way, the sentence was a suspended sentence, so she didn't go to prison, which was fantastic. She came up to myself and the prosecutor and shook our hands and said thank you and burst into tears. And here I am feeling like the bad guy prosecuting this woman, but it just shows you how the criminal justice system is not as black and white, bad guy, good guy, as everyone makes it out to be. It's so complex, so humanistic, and that's what I really enjoy the most about it. So just going back to my experience, so I did work at Chambers, I did voluntary work. After that, I wanted to get a little bit more experience working in defence, so I applied with the Legal Services Commission of South Australia, and that gave me a bit of exposure to mostly the Magistrates Court and the work that the duty solicitors do down there. Again, if you ever get the opportunity, you should go down there and just see what they do, because it's fantastic. And it really gives you an idea of the hustle and bustle of the criminal law, whereas the District Court and Supreme Court are a little bit more controlled, I guess. From there, I applied to the DPP for the summer clerkship program, and it was the best 8 weeks that I've ever had. I had so much fun. As I said in the lecture, I was part of the brief assessment team, which was birthed out of the major indictable reforms in 2015. And as part of my role, I reviewed the charges that came through, assessed the evidence, pieced together the puzzles, and said, should we proceed with this major indictable, or should we drop it back down to a minor, or just drop the charges? So we're starting to see the effects of that coming through at the moment. You've probably seen reports in the paper about Defence Counsel not getting enough work at the moment. Hopefully that backlog will come through at some point. But yeah, it's just a really interesting dynamic. And you can also see that dynamic being played out in the Magistrates Court as well. At the time, there was argument between the prosecutor and Defence Counsel and the magistrate about how these reforms were playing out in practice, and it was just interesting to see how it was affecting the courts and how my work was affecting the way things played out in court as well. In addition to doing the charge determinations, I also assisted in a historical aggravated robbery trial that was based on purely circumstantial evidence that was comprised of DNA evidence and CCTV footage. So I assisted counsel in piecing together that evidence and in writing his opening and closing addresses as well. Unfortunately, it was a not guilty jury verdict on that one, which was highly frustrating because the accused and the accused family were very smug and confronted me multiple times in court as well, which was very, very annoying. But that's, I guess, another thing to take away from it. It's not about winning or losing, especially if you are in the position of a prosecutor. You've just got to do the best that you can and be a model litigant, as they like to say, as well. So after I finished at the DPP, I needed to work out what I want to do going forward. So I started thinking about where I'd like to apply. The DPP doesn't recruit very often. I think that's important to know. Some of you might have seen they've put up adverts for their pools now. But again, that's quite rare, and I'm sure that Sean can attest to that as well. Defence, again, they don't necessarily advertise, but worth sussing and checking that out. Just touching on what Ben said, I think I would stress applying for associateships. So you can apply for them in the Magistrates Court, the District Court, and the South Australian Supreme Court. You can also apply in the federal court, but I don't think that you're going to get criminal if that's what you're wanting to get exposed to. So I wrote up my application to send to Justice Kelly of the Supreme Court. I really wanted to work for her because of her career history, working at the DPP for 14 years, and then she went on to be a silk and then a judge in the district court, and now she's in the Supreme Court. So, and I've seen her in court a number of times, and I really like the way that she reasons and the way that she sentences as well. So with all of that in mind, I wrote up my application, was very excited and scared at the same time, sent the email off to her chambers. About a week later, I got a reply saying, "Hi, thanks for your email. Judge would like to interview you. Can you come to the Supreme Court?" And I cried because I was so excited to get that email, because I thought that I would never get my foot in the door in a place like that, let alone with someone as amazing as Justice Kelly. So I attended my interview. It was honestly one of the strangest interviews I think I've ever had in my life. For the majority of it, she sat in her chair like this and eyeballed me, whilst I'm like this, trying to be on my best behaviour. But at the end of that, I got the job, and I'm so excited for next year. I think it'll be a great opportunity to learn more about the criminal justice system, particularly the appeal process. On that point as well, if you want to do more study about criminal law, I'm not quite sure what other courses there are apart from the sentencing elective that's being offered next semester. I'd highly recommend doing that. I did that last year with Kelly, and it was great to learn not only about the mainstream sentencing processes, but alternative sentencing and concepts such as rehabilitation, etc., etc. I also did miscarriages of justice with David Caruso, who also teaches evidence here. If that gets offered again during the course of your degree, would highly recommend. Sean did that course too, and we both absolutely loved it. Apart from that, I don't really think there's much else that I can say, but if you do have any questions about my experiences, what it's like to see confronting material and how you build up that resilience over time, what it's like being in a court environment, why I like criminal law, feel free to see me around campus. I'm here for another semester, or just message me on Facebook or LinkedIn, because everyone seems to have that now. So,
Hi, I'm Annie. I'm a final year law student. Last year, over November to December, I did work experience in London with a couple of barristers actually. Some we did prosecution and defence, and both of the barristers I was with specialise in major indictable offences, specifically those involving sexual offences with minors. I remember the first day I was absolutely scared. I had no idea. I was literally had just travelled from Australia. I think I rocked up on the plane, hungover, then proceeded to land into London, was very jet lagged, and I rocked up to Luton, which I don't know if many of you been, it's very different to Adelaide. I was told by my barrister on the phone, do not look at anyone, just walk straight to the courthouse and I'll meet you there. Had no idea what I was expecting. I met her and she basically discussed that we would be doing a case. Our client was a 6-year-old and he was up against charges. He was already charged, but we were trying to mitigate his sentence. He had sexual intercourse with a 12-year-old alcoholic, and for me, I was just shocked. I didn't really know what to do, didn't really know what to think, but I just went along with it. And I think at the end of the day, I just had no thought had gone through my head. I remember being on that train back to London thinking, what the hell did I just experience? But after that, it just was the most invaluable and incredible experience. I think any chance you get to go overseas and experience different laws, absolutely take that on, especially in London and in England. The laws are quite similar to Australia, obviously, but they're very different, but they still have the same premise. A lot of the time as well, Australian law graduates are very well looked upon in London and just all over England. I think, according to my barrister, we've got a bit more of a stronger work ethic, so they like to take us on. Additionally, like the breadth of cases you will get, it's very different and is, I don't know, to me, I think Adelaide, I've grown up in a very closed kind of environment, and going over there, it was just absolutely, it was a bit of a shock, but it's just very invaluable. Previously from there, I did a lot of volunteering at the Women's Legal Service, which I would highly recommend. It's a great team there. You get put well into like the deep end of client interviewing. I have also done CLE with Marg, and I did placement with Airlie at both EACLAS, which is at the Equal Opportunity Commission,
Legal Advice Service.
Legal Advice Service, and also ALOS, which is based at Baptist Care Homeless Shelter, with Ross, and both experiences I would 100% recommend. As well, if any of you are kind of concerned or a bit kind of afraid of not whether to go into the legal practice or not, they are definitely good experiences, especially because they're connected with the university, so you do get some kind of security in a sense. I am about to do placement at the DPP over winter, so I'm sure I'll see Sean there. But yes, that's really all I can suggest.
Can I make one more comment? I think both Kelly and David and everyone else has sort of touched on this as well. I think if you want a career in criminal law, you just need to remain true to yourself as well. The amount of times that I've been in interviews for corporate positions and just sat there thinking, what am I doing here? I'm not passionate about this. I would rather be at the DPP or in a defence firm, down in the courts dealing with the hard-hitting humanistic stuff. Just keep that in mind when you are thinking, is criminal law for me? Is corporate law for me? Is a career in the law for me in general? Just stay true to yourself, be genuine, take advice from anyone who you come into contact with who's working in the profession already. And I think that'll really help you piece together whether it's something that you do genuinely want or it's just, oh, that might be exciting.
And I think also be open to approaching people. People want to help you and they will. So it is always quite daunting, like sending off your first email to different law firms, or just even approaching family friends or other friends. It is very daunting, especially for me. I was like, oh, I'm asking for help. I feel kind of weak and a bit embarrassed, but it's not. Like, people want to help you, and I think that's such a good thing about the legal profession, especially the criminal law profession, is that everyone wants to help each other, and if you have that mentality, I think you'll go quite far.
The worst thing is they can say no, and that's it. They don't go and then gossip in chambers about that random and send me an email. They honestly, they don't. They'll just politely say, look, no, thank you, I'm not ready for it, or I don't need that, or it's not something that I offer. They certainly don't put you on a big blacklist and stick it up next to this course, listening to do not talk to this person. That's for sure. And it'll be different in terms of the different people that you contact. There'll be some like Caldecott that are very, very open to people helping out and trying to give them that leg up. So, just don't go and apply for Justice Peak.
The only time I've ever seen anyone blacklisted was when they emailed about 20 different firms in the same email.
Don't start group chats.
I don't think
and it would be quite it was quite daunting emailing the Supreme Court, but Justice Lovell said to me a few years ago, I don't know if it's still true, and he might hate me for saying this, but just send an email, because I think the Chief Justice is trying to encourage everyone to welcome more students into chambers, even just for 2 weeks at a time. I was very nervous because I expected to be treated sort of as an idiotic Australian. At one point I was actually called a convict, but it was in a jovial manner.
Confused with the client.
I was in the Old Bailey courts, which you deal with very high security criminal matters. Just going into the courts was as high security as going through to international flights in Adelaide. But I was very much welcomed and treated as a colleague and not as an idiot, even though I really didn't know much about the matter that we were on. So I'd very much recommend not being worried about your inferiority and just getting in there.
Don't be afraid to ask questions. I know that everyone gives that advice, but people are very, very willing to provide their advice. And I don't think I've ever been in a situation where I've been in a criminal law placement where someone's just snubbed me off and said, no, sorry, I can't provide you with a detailed analysis. Here are some documents. What else would you like to know? So people are always willing to teach you things from their knowledge bank as well. And if they don't have that in their knowledge bank, especially at the DPP, I've found people have gone to other practitioners and said, well, this is their area of expertise, why don't you meet with them to have a chat with them, and then you can get better informed in that respect. So
I love helping people, and I just love that interaction, which obviously you will probably get in corporate law, but for me it was just about, I know it sounds really corny and really kind of egotistical, but for me it was about helping people, and that's just really what it was simply for me.
I think my piece of advice is assess what made you do your degree in the first place. So when I started here, my main objective, again as cliche as it sounds, I just wanted to help people. It was never about the money for me, and it never has. And if it is about the money for you, then you're in the wrong place, because you're going to get 10 years down the track, you'll burn out, and then you'll reassess, why did I actually do this job? What have I achieved? Just look at what makes you passionate, is my advice.
So I think I represent the sellouts here. Corporate crime is something I hadn't considered until I was at the DPP, and the case I was involved in was a huge corporate fraud matter, and it was really interesting. And so that's sort of what has led me to working at Lippman Caris. And fraud certainly is a lot less human than looking at murder or looking at rape, but I think if you find it interesting, then which I do, then it's satisfying. The only other benefit with the corporate sphere is that you're able to do a lot more of pro bono work. So for example, at Lippman Caris, I'm able to do quite a bit of work for JusticeNet, just because we have the financial resources to do that. So as a clerk, I'm able to help with refugee appeals or sometimes minor criminal matters that we see through in their entirety. But corporate crime is definitely more of a niche field that not everyone here is probably very interested in.
I think for me it was because ever since I was little I wanted to either be a detective or a criminal mastermind, and I figured criminal lawyer was sort of, you know, a more middle ground achievable option. But personally I'm more interested in international criminal law, like war crimes and things like that. And I think that's like corporate crime, that's sort of another example of how criminal law is transferable as well. So it's a worthwhile area to have experience in, I suppose, even if it's not really the area that you're 100% passionate about, because it does transfer into things like appeals, corporate crime, international law. All these other areas have a sort of one foot in criminal law as well.
I actually wanted to be a police officer originally. It's one of the reasons why I joined SAPOL. But I started doing work with, like civil procedure and seeing how SAPOL's information was used in that space. And I don't know, I just like dealing in that area. The work is really, really interesting because you see people's lives, particularly with family court matters. You're dealing with de facto relationships that have spanned 20 years, and these people have stayed together for however long, for 20 years, and what happens between them and seeing their lives literally on a computer database. It sounds weird, but it's fascinating. It sounds really cold, but it's interesting to see realistically what people will do, what people will put up with, and see how relationships evolve. So, for instance, it may have started out arguing, it then gets to violence, and then it gets to sexual violence. I don't really think I intended to go out and wanted to be involved in criminal law as a prosecutor or defence counsel. I probably initially wanted to be a police officer, but now I kind of find myself more wanting to be involved in criminal policy, working with whether that's Parliament, whether that's executives in SOPOL, Commissioner's Office and things like that, trying to influence how things actually operate. I've always thought of prosecutors and defence argue about the law, but the policymakers effectively make the law, and they can change it. They're the ones realistically with the biggest influence, and that's I think working in Sabre for 7 years is I've moved into that area where I want to influence the law in a very different manner, a different manner as opposed to arguing about it. So yeah, that's really where I'm at.
And I think that's the main point about the criminal law, is that it is interesting. Everything you do, whether it's day one as a junior solicitor for whoever in the Magis Court, in the absolute circus that is a committal list sometimes, you're going to see people up on drug trafficking charges who have been smuggling it in teddy bears. You're going to see someone that's committed murder and all that sort of stuff. I mean, it is fascinating, and if you're going to ask what drew me to it, I think it's just that ever-changing nature of it. I've seen drugs stuffed in teddy bears. I know more about hypoxic ischemic brain encephalopathy than I would ever thought possible, as well as childbirth. So it's fascinating, and you get these files across your desk, and from day one, whether or not you're in the DPP or at Caldecott or even just assisting David Edmondson, you are going to be subject to that, and it's exhilarating, really. And not to dissuade anyone from corporate law whatsoever, but I certainly couldn't see myself sitting in an office at Minters or something advising on huge merger acquisitions and all of this sort of stuff when I could be down in the Magistrates Court having an argy-bargy with Simon Smart over whether or not possession is actually the gun in the dog kennel. So yeah, it's just fascinating, really, and it makes a really good dinner conversation.
So I started at ALRM, I can't even remember what year, but Amanda Lambden is the lady who runs the criminal practice division. She's been in criminal defence for yonkers, and she's a great person to learn from. But most of the stuff that I did at ALRM was admin work at the start. I worked for a now barrister called Anne Seabury, and yeah, it was mostly just going to the Magistrates Court, seeing these people for the first time, advising them on their pleas. Me not personally, because I don't have a practicing certificate, but Anne was. And yeah, just having that pure contact with these people. One of the things that I really liked about ALRM that translated to a later experience, which I talked about last year at the sentencing lecture, was at the Legal Services Commission. I spent a day at the Nunga Court in Port Adelaide. The Nunga Court is a specialist sentencing court for Aboriginal offenders, and it operates very, very differently to our normal sentencing courts. So if you've ever seen someone being sentenced before, has anyone seen that before? No one? Yeah. Yeah? Alright, everyone else, you need to go and see someone being sentenced, if you can, if it's not a close court, because it's a good experience. So the Nunga Court, like I said, sentences very differently. So usually you have your judge, your accused, and then the gallery counsel. In this court you have your magistrate, Paul, an elder. The accused sits at the bench with counsel. An assisting person, whether that be a support worker or a member of family, may also sit with them, and then defence counsel sits alongside them, and then the police prosecutor or prosecutor from the DPP will also sit there. And the way that they do that is that they talk about the circumstances, so what happened on facts, what was the decision, so what were they convicted of, and then they move on to sentencing. And you not only hear from the judge, which you would normally hear from in a normal sentencing matter, but you also get to hear from the accused and the support person and the family member or whoever else may be attending that day. And then at the end, you hear from the elder, and there's this direct contact between the elder and the accused, and they talk about the offending conduct. why they did this, how that's impacting their community, and it's very, very emotional. I was super lucky to even be let in on this experience, but it's one of the most moving parts of my experiences that I've ever had. Just the sheer raw emotion, the tie back to the community was absolutely worthwhile. So that's why I really loved ALRM, because it gave me that setup to later experiences as well. In addition to ALRM, I also volunteered at JusticeNet as well, because I just wanted to get an idea of what civil would be like, and I didn't hate it, I actually quite liked it, and I learned a lot from it, but it's just from those other corporate experiences that I knew that corporate wasn't for me, and I wanted to do criminal.
The contribution that you can make as a student should never exaggerate it. You can make a real big difference even as a student in these valuable roles, can't you? Most
definitely. I think that's just illustrated again by the work that was done on the case with the lady who was convicted of the stabbing of her husband. Again, I didn't do anything on that per se. I didn't work on the file. All I did was trot down to the magistrate's court thinking this will be a great day. Got down there, it was very emotional, and the prosecutor that I was with advised me a bit about the case. But even still, just being in that environment, you do get this astounding appreciation from the community. Not only that, going back to experience at Chambers, I worked on a petty drug file for a kid who'd come over from Scotland. He was just here visiting, having a good time, carried some pills with him down Hindley Street and was found for possession. Obviously, if he got convicted, then he would be detained and deported. His parents flew over and he got not guilty on that. And after court, I couldn't really, again, I think this stands between the line of professionalism and not professional, but I didn't really know what to do in this context, but his parents actually hugged me and just said, thank you so much for all the work that you've done on this. We really appreciate it, and you don't understand how much it means to us. And I think, I'm a law student, I haven't really done that much at all. I wasn't the one standing at the bench, saying all these lovely things that my barrister had said, but my contribution was still a contribution nonetheless, and it did assist in this person continuing on living in Australia and not going to jail and not being deported. So, yeah.